Let's jump into the top quarterback storylines in fantasy this season, and we'll start with the man that is coming off another Super Bowl victory, but also off of a career low 17.5 points.
I have a question for you guys. I need a ruling on this. Before we get into the quarterback storylines, I just need a ruling for you guys. So I'm in a dynasty league, right? I'm in a dynasty league with a bunch of my buddies from ESPN. And in this dynasty league is producer Damien, who is right now behind the scenes. And so in our dynasty league, there have been no offseason moves all year long. And then what we had is, the commissioner sent out, shout out Scott Clark, all biz. Scott Clark sends out an email yesterday saying like, hey, we're going to do fab bids. And like at noon Eastern, then, I'll roll all. And then once the fab bids are all in, then it's first come, first serve, free agents are open. So my phone is blowing up because producer Damien is going crazy. While in theory, he's producing our show, going crazy, picking up a bunch of players right now. I'm just curious your thoughts on this.
That's the greatness
Damien
of
just
Damien
added.
Dabrowski.
He just added Bo Melton. He just added Cedric Tillman. Just added Jonnu Smith. Again, it's a very deep dynasty league. But and all these players have been gone for a long time. 12-team league, 25-man rosters, no IR spot.
Damien said these claims are from last night and that you're blatantly lying right now.
I disagree. I'm doing it right now. It's clear. It's popping up on my phone. It's just I'm paying attention to the show. Would I have liked Cedric Tillman or Jonnu Smith? Sure. I put
Should've stayed up late.
Because I'm doing the show. Damn it.
You had to
I picked up.
You had to go to bed early for a almost noon taping.
Yeah. Well, we could have pushed it back. I thought, well, at least Damien is busy too. He's not going to beat me to any players because he's going to be busy producing the show. But apparently not. He just hit record and walked away.
Wow. Accusations of not doing one's job to focus on Bo Melton.
Bo Melton.
That's the best part.
I mean, I'm bitter because I put in bids on Cedric Tillman and Jonnu Smith as well. I did get. I'm curious what you think, Connor, and then we'll get into storylines. But just as we talk a little bit of camp news, I did manage to win Dylan Lobb in the Raiders camp.
Well, first off, it's Lobby, but
sure.
Still, no, that's exciting. Good pass catcher in a very thin backfield. How high?
They seem to like him a lot. They're talking him up. Antonio Pierce feels like he's talking him up, and Zamir White had 4 good games, right?
Yeah. Well, and somebody's got to be the other guy. It can't just be Zamir White all the time.
Correct.
Not bad.
Probably not.
So yeah. It's half PPR, but still. Dylan Lobby. There we go. All right, good.
Yeah. By the way, anyone who wagered on Cedric Tillman's name being said over 4.5 times this show, you're only one away from cashing that over, which is ridiculous.
You could have got an alt line at plus 1,200, and you're killing it.
What do you think? Somebody who gets mentioned first in this show, Patrick Mahomes or Cedric Tillman? It's one of those, first to 25 kind of bets, first to 20.
I remember season 1 of this show, we once spent 11.5 minutes on Kenyon Drake. So Cedric Tillman's very much up our avenue.
It was like Ravens Kenyon Drake too. Not,
yeah.
The show hasn't been around that long. So, all right, guys, Patrick Mahomes. The bottom line is QB 10 finish last year, Matthew. Career low in points per game. I mean, this Chiefs offense is going to look different this year, obviously, with the additions they made. Does he return to fantasy stardom?
He does, and it's weird to call Patrick Mahomes a sleeper because obviously he's not.
It's different in fantasy, though.
But but he is. I've seen him go 3, 4, 5 at quarterback. Most people see Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts seem to go 1, 2 in almost every draft that I've seen so far, that I've been in so far. But I've seen people take Lamar. I've seen people take Anthony Richardson over him.
Did Lawrence do that? That sounds like Lawrence. That was Lawrence.
Yeah, of course. But I've seen him even if he goes 3rd or 4th, he's going lower in the overall as well. I think this is a mistake. Again, think about what the Chiefs did this offseason, right? I mean, Patrick Mahomes last year just chucked it deep a ton. The problem was, whether it was Sky Moore or Justin Watson or
MBS.
whoever, Marquise Valdez-Scantling, they couldn't come down with it. So, they
Daniel Day-Lewis doing an MVS impersonation.
Thank you very much for your consideration. But, obviously, drafting, signing Marquise Hollywood Brown, I think is exciting. Another year of Rashee Rice. Again, we're going to see what happens if he gets suspended, but they should have Rashee Rice for the majority of the season, maybe if not all of it. And then why am I blank?
Xavier Worthy.
Xavier, thank you. God, I'm like, why am I blanking on who they drafted? Xavier Worthy, obviously, who is just absolutely fantastic as well. So, and having a strong camp. And then you've got Travis Kelce, and you got my boy Isaiah Pacheco. So there's a lot of weapons for Patrick Mahomes. But I think what's encouraging again is just last year he had a bad year fantasy wise last year. But in terms of what they were doing until they sort of switched towards the end of the year where they just said, screw it, we're just going to have to run the ball and play good defense. Like they were still chucking it deep, just they weren't connecting on plays. And so they've kind of reloaded and say, all right, we're going to get them guys that can not only get open deep, but can catch the ball.
Yep. And 2022, Patrick Mahomes didn't have any wide receivers. His leading wide receivers were Juju Smith-Schuster and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And he won the MVP, and he was QB1 in fantasy. So he doesn't need elite wide receivers. He just needs a baseline of competence. He didn't get that last year. He should get that this year.
Jay, how about Jalen Hurts? When you look at the loss of Jason Kelce, of course, for the tush push, the addition of Saquon Barkley, which could have an impact on his total red zone touches. Hurts has 10 plus rushing touchdowns in all 3 seasons as the starter. How much did those two aspects, those two changes affect him going into this year from a fantasy perspective?
From a fantasy perspective, I think not great. From a football perspective, I think he'll be fine. And I think he'll be better than he was towards the back end of last year. Like the Eagles were 10-1 and Jalen Hurts was like plus 130 to win MVP. And then the rails, he just went completely off the rails. And I think by spending the amount of money that they did on Saquon Barkley, you probably don't want to be rushing your franchise quarterback up the middle as much as they did when you have Barkley there. And without Jason Kelce there to execute the tush push, that'll hurt too. But I think that Hurts is going to play better in a football sense this year and maybe have slightly less fantasy volume. But I mean, this is a weird team now because the articles come out, Tim McManus, Jeremy Fowler, the kind of detailing the Sirianni-Hurts relationship and how the offensive coordinator change is perhaps going to bridge that. But I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty around this team, but you would suspect that Hurts's floor is still very high just with the amount of weapons that he has and that offensive line.
I also think he wasn't healthy last year. He just didn't look right. It never really came out. And so I agree with Jay. I think probably if you were, projecting out, you'd say like, all right, probably less rushing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts, but probably better passing. And again, when you dump it off, when you throw a 2-yard, 3-yard dump off to Saquon Barkley, and then he takes it 25 yards, those all count as passing yards. And so the addition of Kellen Moore as the offense coordinator had so much success with Dak Prescott. And I know it was a tough year for the Chargers last year, but that felt like just a lost situation from top to bottom, obviously. And, Brandon Staley seemed to just lose that team from sort of moment one. So I sort of write that off. I think Kellen Moore is a good offense coordinator. Again, we'll find out. But I think you're right, Jay, that ultimately I think there's a higher floor with Jalen Hurts. He still had, even without the quote, the tush push has sort of become a thing over the last year and a half, but he's had double-digit rushing touchdowns every year he's been in the NFL. And so while it may not be as prevalent as it was last year, I think he'll be better and more efficient as a passer. He's still going to run some. They're still going to use it some. And so he's my QB2. And I feel pretty good about, as a Commanders fan, I don't feel pretty good about it, but I do feel pretty good from a fantasy analysis point that if Jalen Hurts is your starting quarterback, you're in good shape.
Matthew, here's maybe the trickiest one in Anthony Richardson. We're working off small sample size, off of ability and the offense. This is a guy that could be the best quarterback in fantasy. But the problem is all of those things that made him so great in fantasy for a few games also led to him getting hurt for the entire season. What could a full season of Anthony Richardson look like? And do they have to scale back how he played as a rookie?
I don't think they're gonna like what's the old right? What's the Cam Newton quote? You got to let the lion roar or whatever. He's Anthony Richardson. You draft Anthony Richardson because of who he is. He's played he's played a certain style his entire life. He's not gonna all of a sudden become like just this drop back, a Kirk Cousins type passer, like whatever, Matt Ryan or whatever. He's gonna be Anthony Richardson there. So I don't think he can. He's also, by the way, I feel I feel, and we're going to talk about like Jaden Daniels, for example. Like, I feel less worried about Anthony Richardson getting injured than somebody who's, thinner, skinnier, like a Lamar Jackson or a Jaden Daniels. I mean, like, Anthony Richardson's a big dude. He's
so Josh Allen.
Right. That's exactly right. And so, like, obviously a tough injury last year, but I don't know that's indicative of here's a guy that is quote unquote injury prone. And yes, we have a small sample size from last year, but a year ago, we all liked Anthony Richardson as a sleeper with no sample size. We've now seen the potential and what he can do. And, I think the concern on Anthony Richardson heading into last year was like, okay, we know about the rushing ability and the athletic prowess, but how refined is he going to be as a passer? He really needs to he's really raw as a passer. And I think everyone was sort of pleasantly surprised, like, okay, yes, he can get the ball to Michael Pittman. Yes, he can get the ball to Josh Downs. He can get the ball to his players. And, is he an elite passer? Is he Patrick Mahomes? Not yet, but like, he's not a nothing. Like, I thought he was better as a passer as a rookie than Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, both of whom, in their rookie years, the coaches were like, just basically run the ball as much as you can. So I thought it was a much more balanced offense last year. Again, credit to Shane Steichen and what he did there. I am a QB5, guys. I mean, this is somebody who, again, all small sample size, but 24% of his passes went at least 15 yards or more downfield. That would have been top 3 for the season over a full season had he qualified for that, right? He had double-digit rushing attempts in both of his full games last year, over 20 fantasy points in both those games. Again, small sample size, but this is somebody that is willing to run when he gets in close, and willing to chuck it deep. And so he's my QB5. The other point about Richardson here that I think is important is that especially when you're in a 1 QB league, the replacement level is so easy. Richardson is somebody who legitimately a year from now we could be talking about as the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. That's easily within the range of outcomes for Anthony Richardson. And so I don't have a problem taking a swing on that upside, especially given that it's so easy to replace a quarterback in fantasy these days.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that we kind of forget how big a leap quarterbacks can take in their second year. Yeah. Mahomes' second year, he throws 50 touchdowns, he wins MVP. Lamar Jackson's second year, fresh off like fumbling 50 times against the Chargers in a playoff game, just being unable to hold on to the ball. He takes the league by storm. Ravens go 14-2. He wins MVP unanimously. Jalen Hurts' second full season, he is in the mix to win. He's the favorite to win MVP before he gets hurt late in the year. Now, Look, that's not what the typical quarterback will do, just become an MVP candidate in year 2. But Richardson has that upside. And as you mentioned, Matthew, like he showed, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't crisp as a passer all the time, but he showed flashes of like next level understanding of timing and anticipation. And if I was to place like a speculative flyer on an MVP long shot, like Anthony Richardson in the 30 to 1, 40 to 1 range. Like he's the type of guy, if you're looking for someone to have that Mahomes, Lamar type of leap, I think he's the one just because of just the incredible raw potential.
CJ Stroud coming off a offensive rookie of the year season, Jay, but with Stroud in fantasy, he's just a pure pocket passer. He didn't reach 200 rushing yards last year, but in 14 full games, averaged almost 20 fantasy points per game. So knowing he's a pure pocket passer, Jay, what is the fantasy ceiling for Stroud in an offense that's just dripping with talent and weapons across the board?
Yeah, I don't know why he's a pure pocket passer. Like I always like it when he uses his legs. He had one game against the Jags where he was 6 carries for 47 yards. Think back to that, the semifinal against Georgia as well, where he used his legs really effectively. But seems like that's just not part of his game. And that's fine because the rest of it is amazing. I think with Stroud, obviously it's all there. He's incredible. But the one thing with him is that if you look back through his game log last year, he didn't have to play many great defenses. And when he did, like I think back to the game against the Jets, where the Texans almost got shut out. That was the game that he got concussed late on. And he was like 10 for 23 in that game. He struggled in both games against the Ravens. Now he completely lit up the Browns, who had a great defense, but they're a high variance defense. The Browns also gave up 38 to Gardner Minshew at one point. But Stroud, look, I don't doubt the talent. I don't doubt that he's good. I don't doubt that they're going to throw the ball a little bit more. I thought he was constrained by that last year in the Slowick offense, particularly in that final game against Indianapolis, where it's like, why are you running the ball up the gut? You've got CJ Stroud, and he's just tearing the Colts secondary to shreds. So I think ultimately he is going to take a step forward, but I just wonder with we don't have a massive sample of his career. We don't have a massive sample against elite defenses, against the first place schedule. I think that is going to be offset by the fact that they will throw more, but I don't think he's not nearly as sure of a bet as the guys at the absolute top in terms of guys being drafted.
I think that's fair. I'm at QB6. I think they will be more pass heavy, to your point, than they were last year, where they weren't actually that pass heavy, right? I mean, they were actually pretty balanced on offense, and sort of they eventually let the training wheels come off. But think about this year. He's got not only, so to your point about rookies, or from year one to year two. I mean, we're talking about Richardson, you mentioned. I mean, like, think about Stroud from year one to year two in a season in which he hopefully has a full season of Tank Dell, a full season of Nico Collins, and then they added Stephon Diggs. And whatever you think of Stephon Diggs last year, and the jury is still out of whether that was the play calling and just some missed plays, or Stephon Diggs has hit a wall over the second. I mean, like, Stephon Diggs was as good as any wide receiver in the NFL in the first half of last year. It was the second half of last year where it just seemed like, where'd Stephon Diggs go? And so hopefully it changes scenery, but Diggs is on a 1-year prove-it deal in Houston, who's going to see a lot more single coverage than he ever did in Buffalo. So I think the knock on Stroud, to your point, is the lack of rushing, which is why I'm at QB6. But I don't know. I don't have a stat for this, but just you watch that guy and you're like,
yeah,
he's him, right? That dude is special. Like, he's just that guy. And so I am, while I would be nervous if you took away the name and you just looked at the stats, I would agree with you, Jay. I think there's things to be nervous about, especially because of the lack of rushing. And generally speaking, to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback, you need to run, and he was very high touchdown variance last year. But my expectation is that I think that dude is just special. And I think what they've done this year, the Texans have done, is to basically set him up for a tremendous amount of success. So I'm in on CJ Stroud. I'm at QB6.
Yeah, there are definitely worlds where CJ Stroud, we're talking about him as the biggest threat to Mahomes in terms of being the best player in football this time next year. That's absolutely on the cards. And even in the bad games that he had statistically, I don't think he played poorly against the Ravens in that playoff loss. Like, they were really banged up along the offensive line, which should be better. Tank Dell going down obviously hurt. Yeah, I think CJ Stroud is a monster. I just don't think he probably on average has the upside that Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen do fantasy-wise, just because of the rushing.
Right now, guys, Dak Prescott is typically the 10th or 11th quarterback off the board in drafts, depending where you play. But last year, Dak, a top 5 finish. He was QB4 in points per game last season. He was QB1 over his final 12 games. Matthew, are people simply forgetting how good Dak was and is? Because I understand if he's not being drafted as a top 5 quarterback, but hovering around being the 10th quarterback taken is a steep drop.
Especially when you think about, look, as you guys know, I am not the biggest Dak Prescott real life quarterback fan. But I do think that the public narrative of Dak sort of choking in the playoffs, choking in big moments, has clouded people in terms of what his fantasy prospects are. Now, the one thing about Dak is that he stopped running. Early in his career, this was a guy that was good for, 6 rushing touchdowns a year. And over the past 3 seasons, he's got 4 rushing touchdowns total. So that has stopped. But to your point, all they do is throw. And there's nothing that you've seen this offseason that makes you think that all of a sudden they're going to go run heavy. They let Tony Pollard leave. They didn't address the position in the draft, really. And their backfield is like Ezekiel Elliott, who they let walk out the door 2 years ago. And he's now back. And they've got Malik Davis, Royce Freeman.
Special teams, Royce Freeman.
Yeah, exactly. Rico Dowdle, Deuce Vaughn, not really a murderer's row there of running backs. And so you expect that they're going to throw a ton. Dak Prescott, 6 different games last year with at least 25 or more fantasy points. That led all quarterbacks. He led the NFL in completions, in completion percentage, passing touchdowns, and in fantasy points per game over the final 12 games. From week 6 on, Dak Prescott was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy. And to your point, he's barely being drafted as a QB1 in most leagues. And so I agree with you. I am no Cowboy fan. I am not a Dak Prescott fan from a real life NFL perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, I think he's being massively overlooked.
Yeah. After the thing with Dak is that after the San Francisco game on Sunday Night Football in week 5, he had an incredibly soft slate of defenses, and we know that he's incredible in the dome, but he's going to be playing in the dome again, and he's going up against the NFC South, other teams in the NFC East. He's going to be lighting these teams up again. And I think a reasonable expectation for Dak is, say, what he did more in 2021, where he was QB7 and he got through the season healthy. I think that is probably I think that's a reasonable expectation for him, because the thing with Dak is that I think he just got a lot better at the quarterback position last year. He just had a greater mastery of the offense. He was playing with great confidence, and particularly when you can call him a front runner if you want to, because he has struggled outdoors against really good defenses. But I think that he's just going to compile stats in the dome with CD. The offensive line is going to be a little bit worse, I think, and that would be the concern. But Dak's 31. There shouldn't be a big drop-off coming.
The Roto-World Fantasy Football Draft Guide is now available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Roto-World Draft Guide plus fantasy, DFS, and betting tools to help you dominate your draft and the season. Use promo code ROTOWORLD10 for 10% off. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. What a deal, Matthew.
It's really good, by the way. And I've asked them, see if we get like a Connor 5 and a J1.
I was going to say, where'd our promo codes go?
Yeah, we got to get that going. But yeah, no, really excited about the partnership between NBC Sports, Roto-World, obviously, and Fantasy Life. These tools that we have at Fantasy Life, the Fantasy Life Plus tools, are really, really amazing. Our draft champion, wait till you try the draft champion. You obviously get the Roto-World Draft Guide as well. All sorts of tools and analysis. Go check it out. But I am just telling you, these tools are so incredible. Like, it will help you draft. By the way, you can draft against like an AI version of me. It will rate your draft. It will grade it. Like you can whatever kind of system. Like if you're in a league where like your producer screws you over and like while he's supposed to be working on your show, he snags like Bo Melton and Jonnu Smith. You can put that into the draft champion. It's completely customizable to whatever your settings are, and then you can sync it with your league, and so it'll suggest free agents and trades to make, and it's honestly, it's a really terrific thing. So NBCSports.com/fantasy life to check out more. The Fantasy Life Plus and Roto-World Draft Guide combo is really good. Really, I'm super excited about it, honestly.
AI Matthew Berry is terrifying. Feels like one of the robots that turned on Will Smith in iRobot.
Where's this going to end up?
Yeah. Who do you think AI Matthew Berry is going to turn on, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Me and Bo Melton.
Pretty much.
And Damian.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's continue our quarterback storylines here. Let's get into the deeper cuts.
Hey, real quickly, before we move on to the quarterback storylines, I just want to... Well, no, we're going to get to somebody else here in a second that I obviously want to talk about. But I just, in terms of, this is not somebody that's going to come up, but just as long as we're talking about guys that I think are completely underrated in terms of quarterback, Dak is one of them. The other one, very quickly, Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray has number one quarterback in fantasy upside, and he's been going as like somewhere between QB7 and QB9 in a lot of drafts. I love Kyler Murray. Love Kyler Murray this year. We'll talk more about him later on. When Love Hate comes out, 100 facts will be out soon. There'll be a bunch of facts about Kyler Murray. I'm big into Kyler Murray this year. I think Kyler Murray is going to have a monster season, and I think people are sleeping on Kyler Murray.
I think there's a case they have.
He's on the ride or die list too. I'm not saying he is the ride or die, but I'm just saying he is on the ride or die list. He's on the short list.
I think the Cardinals might have the most underrated running back as well. Anyone realize James Conner was like third in the NFL for rushing yards per game last year? Like, no one talks about him ever. He's just really, really good. But yeah,
the addition. He was a top 10 fantasy quarterback once he came back last year as well. The addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously is a massive upgrade. We all love Trey McBride, friend of the podcast, and the human Dortch, Greg Dortch. Don't sleep on him. I thought Michael Wilson had some nice moments too. The defense is terrible. Obviously, you've got the rushing upside with Murray as well. I think there's a lot there for a very good fantasy season for Kyler Murray. And I think just because of the injuries and some of the, he plays video games instead of studying the playbook, all the BS rumors and everything like that, I think people are just down on Kyler Murray for some reason. And I think that's a mistake.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotorWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.